Welcome to the Bassline with Jeremiah Hosea. It's a wonderful Friday afternoon here in New York City. We want to thank you for tuning in, and we have a very incredible show prepared today. I can't believe it, actually. One of my heroes of independent media is on the line, and in a moment we're going to be joined by the one and only Ryan Cristian of the Last American Vagabond. Ryan Cristian is just a phenomenal individual. I've come across his work. I'm not sure when I originally came across his work, actually. I've been racking my brain to think when, first of all, did I first become aware of TLAV, and when did I start locking into TLAV? Because I'm a regular listener, and I'm trying to think. I'm not exactly sure when that began. But his COVID coverage has been outstanding, and it's a show unlike any other that I've come across. I'm an information junkie, as I've mentioned before. I just love good information sources. I'm constantly seeking information. As I exercise, I'm listening to a lecture of some kind or another. If I'm practicing the bass, I like listening to talk radio, lectures, documentaries. So when I come across a show like The Last American Vagabond, it's just a treasure for me. And we're going to jump right into it. Is Ryan Cristian on the line?
Yes, I am.
Oh, my goodness. I can't believe it. Thank you so much for joining me, Ryan. It's such an honor to have you on the air.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. Well, let me say, first of all, Ryan is a real deal dude because I don't have a very big Twitter following. I'm not very active on Twitter. I sort of jumped onto Twitter after not being active at all, never looking on Twitter. And then as the COVID scenario started heating up, it wound up being one of the best sources of information until people started getting censored like crazy. But I reached out to Ryan just maybe in an open message, and he's been perfectly willing to interact with, a little guy like me. I think I'm a little bit more known in the music world, but I'm an up-and-coming citizen journalist. So for you to be here, Ryan, you're really helping me uplift my platform, and I greatly appreciate that. Now,
my pleasure. My pleasure. I think it's important, quite frankly, it's still hard for me to kind of see myself that way. I'm still the one proud to get an interview with James Corbett. I've come on that path myself, but it's so important that we help give others a leg up, or just way that a lot of this world works, where people will just, like you're saying, kind of put their nose up to people that aren't big enough. That's just never been my style. I think that's a poor way to go about it.
Well, I love that attribute of yours. I think it's incredible. And it's really crazy because my debut episode, which was last week, featured my good friend Ryan Waters, who's the lead guitar player for Sade. So it's kind of strange. Maybe we could get our numerologists and our astrologists on the case. What is the meaning of two Ryans in a row? Can we add up the numerology around that? But let's jump right into this conversation. Our world has been turned upside down, Ryan. You keyed into things that I was aware of, and that's when I first saw, I don't even remember which program it was exactly, someone in the information group that I formed in reaction to the COVID agenda shared one of your bits. And I enjoyed it so much, I made sure to just start tuning in regularly. And now I'm just a regular listener of TLAV, and it's my number one news show right now, which means a lot to me.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let me ask you, first of all, I want to get into what's happening today, but I want to know a little bit more about you. So first of all, when did you become this alert, politically minded, philosophical investigator? Were you always like that as a kid? Did you inherit that from one of your parents or both of your parents, or is that something that's unique to you? Where did you get this curiosity from?
Yeah, I think I'd like to say it's a combination of both. I was actually just talking about this, funny enough, with my mom about the interesting dynamic between I grew up most of the time with my mom and my stepdad. But my mom and my dad in particular were the interesting dynamic, whereas my dad was a teacher, still is a little bit, but, he's always a teacher. But I guess you could say one of the good ones, if people know what I mean. He was always very about encouraging people to question what they're being taught. That's very rare, in even the teaching field. But so he was always kind of the person telling me, what do you think about that? How does that make you, how does that add up with what you think you understand before? And then my mom was the side of it going, how does that make you feel? right? How does that, what does that mean to you in a deeper level? And it really kind of so I was getting both of these. Most people don't get that, both those kind of perspectives. And I really do think one, allowed me to understand that it's completely okay to question orthodoxy in anything, no matter how, revered, because we're supposed to. That's intelligence. And at the same time, though, considering how the emotional side of it plays into it, not our emotional reactivity, but more so just compassion, empathy, things that are dying in this world, it seems. But so that really kind of at a young age opened my mind to certain things, about any number of things. Like my mom, for another example, even though they were very strict Catholics the way they were raised, and we still went to church, and I'm Christian today, she brought it to me at a very young age that said, this is what I think, but I want you to decide for yourself what you think. Right. At a young age, which, again, I'm just blown away when I think about these things today. And I went through my own path, and I chose to, have a very specific perception on organized religion and, spirituality in general. But she gave me that freedom, So long story short, that is a big part of it. But I think looking back now at myself, as I was then, I didn't really think of it that way. But I notice more and more today of certain things that I thought then or asked, and I'm thinking, yeah, I was definitely on that path even as a young kid, pushing back against what teachers told you shouldn't do, real small things, or just questioning bigger understandings of what we were taught, And then really for me, all that time forward, I was still very kind of normie, if you will, trusting what the news said. I didn't understand what these thoughts really meant until I think the cannabis conversation really opened my mind to a lot of things. Really kind of realizing for the first time that we were lied to on a really obvious way about, the safety, the medical purposes of hemp and cannabis in general. And that is one of the big opening doors for me. That's actually how I started the Last American Vagabond, entirely around cannabis law reform, and just how that one discussion really it had its fingers in almost everything, and we're seeing a lot of that today. But that exploded from there and broadened it out to just about anything we're being lied to about,
Well, that's great, because that leads me to the next sort of background question I have, which is, could you give us a quick history of TLAV, the Last American Vagabond? When did you found it? You said it was just now that it was motivated largely by the laws and everything pertaining to cannabis. When did it start expanding into the varied subject matter that you now start to cover, that you cover now so extensively?
Yeah, it's hard to get an exact date because it grew in a very organic way. I never, even the first so many years, I never really envisioned what it is now. It was more of just like a side project. It was at a time where, maybe people don't know, I'm a classically trained chef. I went to the Culinary Institute of America in Napa Valley.
Oh,
and for years, and got my degree there. And, so I've been a chef my whole life.
And a talented musician, I might add. So very talented all-around guy here.
We should talk about that later, indeed. I'm definitely trying to lean more into that these days.
Absolutely.
But so I definitely, started to, I just lost my train of thought.
You were talking about the culinary school and the evolution of TLAV?
Yeah, so I, essentially, after that whole time frame, and I kind of grew into this, I was traveling with my buddy. So I was kind of in between jobs. I was at a point where I still loved living. I loved what I was doing, but I just felt like I needed to change. And so I was traveling the U.S. That's kind of where the name comes from, the Last American Vagabond.
Right.
Traveling. I was picking up jobs here. I was actually working as a GM in Texas for a while. He started a website randomly, which kind of I said, I want to do that. I just randomly started the very first thing, the Last American Vagabond.blog.com or something. And then it just kind of exploded from there. And the more I began to see that the cannabis side of this, people being put in prison recidivism, and how this continues to blossom into something much bigger, blossom being a bad word for that. But so then I just kind of opened that up to saying, okay, well, what else are we being lied to about? Obviously 9/11 was a really big moment for a lot of people, including myself, where, I was watching on TV, and then immediately started to see things that didn't add up. And so just from there, it just blossomed into literally anything that we're being misled about, and with an overwhelming focus on, as I even jokingly say these days, irritating objectivity. Like, I think we need that today. We need to go over the top.
That's one of my favorite features of your show, by the way. I love that quality about what you do. Yeah, that objectivity is lacking. Sorry, say it again?
I just said it's hard, though, because it really, just by the name, it really does kind of frustrate some people. Where, like, even James Corbett jokingly said this one time, where he loves that I do that. we were talking, and he was like, even sometimes I'll be watching it, and he's like, oh, come on, Ryan. Like, you don't need to point that out. But I feel like it's important because of how overwhelmingly, intentionally ridiculous and hyperbolic everything is. We just have to go above and beyond, to be as objective as possible. And I think it's having an effect. I really do.
Right. Well, I think we're kindred spirits in that sort of way. It reminds me of a book. I don't know if you've ever heard of a book. And actually, I need to read this book still. I'm so embarrassed I haven't read it because a friend of mine years ago made me very interested in a book that it took me years to finally get my hands on called The Man Without Qualities by Robert Musil. And it's a favorite of Sigmund Freud's, and I need to read this book. I bought it, and the first paragraph was such stunning writing. I was just paralyzed. I didn't want to read this book outside of paradise. So it's like I need to just get back and read the book because it's just such a fascinating book. But the concept is a man who's very intelligent and sees both sides of every argument so well that he cannot make a decision. He cannot define himself in the world, basically. He is the man without qualities. So I think you're not like that and I'm not like that because we have principles, but we are very much like that in trying to really genuinely see both sides of an argument and see the subtle area in between, because I'm finding more and more that people are just into this just sort of crude master-slave dialectic. It's like either someone's God or they're the devil.
Right.
And it's like, well, what if somebody's wrong about 99% of what they say, but they are very right about that one particular thing? You're going to overlook the one thing because you've convinced yourself this person's simply wrong when they speak or they express themselves. And the other way around, right? Someone could be very right about almost everything that they say, but particularly wrong about one thing which may be very important or not that important. But
often by design in that latter part, for sure. If I could comment really quickly on the title you brought up. I'm not familiar with the book. It looks interesting, and I definitely will check it out. But from what I take what you're saying there, it does definitely highlight the pitfall of that, right? And which is also very important to consider. Like, it's not the idea of objectivity is not to go so far as to never make a choice, right? Like we're talking about. Like you definitely need to, and that's where you pointed out. That's where your integrity comes in. It's your morals, your beliefs, even just your opinions. The idea that you considering all these things, you maintain the best amount of objectivity, but there's also the pitfall where people are ending up in a position where they just choose to always walk the line. And I get that criticism sometimes too, and fair enough. I don't think I do it, but it certainly could be happening. So it's a difficult time, and I think a lot of these things are by design, like you just pointed out. It's almost like they using the agendas. You drive people into positions of apathy, of a lack of empathy. So many different things are happening because of that, and it's like that's again why we have to be so objective. Because if you're not willing to stand back and ask, if at the very least you might be wrong, like you're pointing out, then you're always going to be misled.
Right.
Often, I should say.
Right. And that leads us into what I would like to discuss with you, because it's something that you've covered so extensively and in such great detail, which is the COVID conversation. And now, I want to make a statement here, and I'd love to hear your reaction to it. I think that the fact that the governments of the world pressured their citizens to take experimental drugs that are now resulting in observable excess mortality is the biggest item in the news today. I believe that if you're watching a news source that's not covering that, turn off that news source and don't listen to it anymore, because either they're not aware of what's going on or they're aware of what's going on and they're hiding it from you. But I find it completely outrageous that governors and senators and congresspeople and the president himself and the vice president took it upon themselves to make medical prescriptions to the public. I mean, how dare they? I find that so outrageous. And I guess the first question I want to ask is, what comes to mind? How do you think this uniformity was achieved? I'm someone, I just sit back and I remain dumbfounded about this still. I mean, the things that we just lived through and we witnessed with our own eyes, we heard with our own ears, we experienced the whole thing. And I still just sit here in utter amazement. Why didn't one mayor, why didn't one congressperson, a senator, someone speak up and just say, I don't feel comfortable making medical recommendations to people? I think that's a personal thing. How are they all so well prepared to follow orders? What's the deal with that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, in the first part in general, just, that I agree with you, and I think that it's impossible not to see that this is not even, I shouldn't even say likely. Like, I think objectively the biggest thing we've ever seen in the planet. Like, I don't know how we can't see how crazy that is. Like, and I'm not necessarily even getting into the idea of whether more or less people were killed. I do think we're beginning to see that. But just the sheer, like what you're talking about, like to reference the lockstep aspect of the larger document, right? The Rockefeller document, the idea that literally in lockstep around the planet, you can have governments initiate things, even adversary governments. Like, it really is astounding. And so I'm with you that the idea that this would not be in everyday news right now, because it's still developing, is kind of crazy. And you're right. I've said a similar thing over the years lately, that taking the medical field, for example, they kicked all the people out that didn't take the shot. So you were effectively left with people that were either too dumb to know they were wrong or chose to ignore it for a multitude of reasons. And that's really alarming. That's military, police, hospital, and that's who we're dealing with now, you know? But so to your point, the second point, you know, it's such a hard question, and it really is opinion, right? But the idea that it's sort of like the manufacturing consent, or exactly that, right? Even though that he in himself kind of lost it throughout COVID, the main point about manufacturing consent goes back to the idea that people, at some level, there's an authority, right? There's a kind of a decision-making organization, individual, however you want to look at it. I tend to see it as kind of a multifaceted, you know, the Davos things, the World Economic Forum kind of organizations, where they've decided that basically that these things, like, well, first of all, that they need something to come to pass. Let's just say the Great Reset, right? Or whatever kind of perception they had of that 20, 30 years ago. Maybe they didn't have the technology yet. Right? So they try to put people in positions that would hold the kind of values that they think are necessary. Again, to take it back to, I didn't explain it all the way through, the idea of the media part of it is that, as he's often pointed out, people are in positions.
You're talking about Noam Chomsky, correct?
Oh, excuse me. Yes, Noam Chomsky. I'm sorry.
And just to be clear, also, Noam Chomsky, although he sort of popularized the term manufacturing consent, he did actually take that term from who he referred to as the Dean of American Journalism, Walter Lippmann. Right.
In this example in general, though, and my point was he kind of lost his mind through COVID.
Absolutely. I'm so horrified by what Chomsky has said.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
I still greatly respect his previous work, and I'd like to just chalk it up to him being scared, but I find it really hard to believe. But anyway, the point was that he's always argued, that it's not that these people in media necessarily even know that they're lying, right? It's that they are in that position because they were deemed to already hold certain concepts and beliefs in high regard. And so They end up in a position where they act not even knowing they're being dishonest in some cases, otherwise they just do it to protect their position. But on a large scale, it's been engineered that way, right? So if you're a person that has lots of integrity and you won't even make it past the steps of that building. Like that's the kind of way, and a lot of people involved in those decisions don't even realize that's what they're doing.
Right.
It kind of trickles down.
Right.
So on a larger scale, you could argue that something like that's been done for possibly our entire existence, decades, who knows. But we can see that with the military. We can see that with all these power structures where people have been kind of engineered into a certain mindset. So then you take the initiation of this. Now, my first thought is, what was it that caused them to act in such a clumsy, rushed, kind of rational way? We all see that. Like in history, U.S. government in particular has always showed that it's measured in a lot of degree, maybe not U.S. foreign policy, but like long-term agendas where they will kind of execute smaller parts of it. They'll react based on our reactions, and then they'll take different choices. But in this case, it just seemed like it was ham-fisted. It's happening. We're driving this in, and my gut tells me it's because there was a timeline that we're not aware of.
Right.
Something. We could talk about larger things like Yuga cycles or different planetary shifts or, 1,000-year issues of people, historical issues of the planet. Or you could just simply talk about maybe they buy their own BS. Maybe they believe the planet's going to come to an end because of climate change. Who knows? But my point is that they definitely initiated this and at the expense of their own credibility because they kept pushing. And that woke up more people than I've ever seen in my life. So why, I don't really know, but my gut tells me that it's because there was something that they felt they needed to execute now. And it could just be because they saw their diminishing credibility already and realized it's a dying, kind of a cornered animal and they have to react, But anyway, I could theorize all day, but I'm with you. And I think this is probably one of the biggest things we have ever seen. And it's almost deliberately now being downplayed by a lot of independent and corporate media for that very reason. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, I find it amazing that people want to forget about this so quickly, but then I realize the people who really want to forget about it are the people who bought into it the most and
Exactly.
who often wound up being the foot soldiers of all of this. That's the thing that drives me, just insane is I find it crazy that people were willing to take a rushed-to-market experimental drug, but to be angry at others for not taking it. How insane, how absurd.
It's kind of the same point, though, right? Is that these people, over the process of so many years, so many decades, people have been conditioned slowly, one at a time, one topic at a time, to take things at face value. You could really right now overlap that with the reshuffling of journalism, which Twitter Files is doing, and a lot of other games where they're retraining people to engage with non-source material as provable information. So it's the same kind of thing on a large scale. We were engineered and trained and conditioned to think that doctors and scientists are altruistic. They wouldn't be there if they weren't. Like, you can trust them. You can trust your government. Government gives you rights, like these kind of things. None of that's true. These are just people with their own dynamics, maybe with addictions, maybe with, failing marriages. Like, these people have issues that drive them to take the actions that are dishonest. And that's not even getting into whether they're, corrupt, like actually involved with some kind of larger agenda.
Right.
So what the average person falls into the line, they think they're doing the right thing, then they get scared, they get shouted at. They say, you're going to lose your job, we're going to take your children. And this is my whole point, though. Like, I'm willing to bet you if they came out and said, take this thing, even if they lied and said, nope, perfectly safe, not experimental, and then we all showed the people like we did that it was a problem, and that was all and where it stopped, they would have failed. My point is we've continued to show that they did not have the momentum even from the start. They had to corral, they had to cajole, they had to scream, they had to threaten, coerce, and then people took it. And even then, they still didn't get 100, 50%, and they kept having to push new shots, new threats.
They really ran the gamut in terms of they tried every strategy within a window of time to convince people to take this stuff. It started out by just moralism, just be a good person. It's for your neighbor. Then it was prizes, pizza and free weed and free beer and other things, lotto tickets. Then it was you're being a bad person, So and then there's just the fact that I find it utterly amazing the general lack of interest in the subject. Like, I don't want to sit here just in total amazement because I want to get into some solution-oriented thinking in some other segments of the discussion. But I find it amazing that people are willing or were willing and are willing still in some cases, unfortunately, to follow orders and comply with various things, but then seem to just have an apparent lack of interest in, for example, where the virus came from. Like, one of the weirdest things that I've heard people say, and actually I was kind of surprised to hear Geert Vanden Bossche just yesterday, I think, or no, sorry, it wasn't yesterday. It was the previous Thursday, a week before yesterday. Geert Vanden Bossche was a guest on the High Wire, and he repeated something that I can't stand to hear, which is that where the virus came from doesn't really matter at this point. Well, how could you say that? I mean, it's of paramount biological and legal importance. Mm-hmm. Like, I just find it so strange. Like I've been saying, if a dude punched another dude, there would be a bigger criminal investigation than around people who started a global virus a virus that spread around the world, which is another question. And I don't want to just jump all over the place, but just to put it out there for your further inquiries and just for the general discussion, I think one of the most fascinating things about COVID that we have to return to is the question of this virus, how it spread and how it did not spread. Because, there's so many instances that I heard of people who were in an apartment with a COVID patient, someone who was, fairly sick or very sick in some cases, coughing and had various symptoms, and they didn't get sick themselves. So how did the virus spread all the way around the world and then not spread in a room or a household? I don't know, but that's the type of thing I would like to have an answer to. But my question for you now, Ryan, is considering the divisiveness of all of this and the fact that this has split families up, this has ended friendships. It's been such an incredibly divisive thing, this whole COVID event and the policies that resulted from it, and then, the subsequent, changes in personality and the political realignment and everything that seemed to happen. What do you think is the right tone for us to take with the medical freedom movement? Because I'm finding it's a fine line that we walk, in that on the one hand, we don't want to antagonize people and we don't want to divide any further. But how do we speak seriously enough about this? Like I have a hard time speaking with kid gloves when folks are dying. It's kind of not the time. It's not kid gloves time. I don't think when folks are dying and there's this incredible health emergency that's happening, and then of course, again, all the legality that goes along with that, and theoretically us being able to protect ourselves from such an event in the future through improving the laws and maybe having some laws passed to protect us against medical mandates and other such things, if that were possible.
Well, see, that's the frustrating part about all this, is they already exist. We have international law, we've got bioethics, we've got state, federal, all these different things that they just pretend there was some kind of a loophole. Right. Well, you can't force except when we argue that X, Y, and Z. And that's where you get into the problem. Or you could literally just point to your constitutional rights, which shall not be infringed or God-given. They can't just argue, except there's a caveat, which they do without everything today. Right? This is just dishonesty. So to go with your last question first, the idea would be at this point, it's very simple. Like it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If all you're trying to accomplish is individual liberty and people allowed to make their own choices, then that's where we draw that line. We tell people, I'm not going to get into debating with you about whether this is safe. The point is it's your choice. Do it yourself. You want to take it, it's up to you. You want to make these decisions for your children, that's on your family. That's your choice. I am making my choice. The moment you begin to argue that I have to do something for your safety, you're losing your mind. You have lost content. You have lost the understanding of what liberty means, of what constitutional rights are, of what any of these things are. Like, how can we have an international bioethics declaration from UNESCO that literally says that you cannot put the individual or the rights of society above that of the individual, that you cannot pretend science is more important than your personal choice, and that we always have the right to say no? And then they just go, never mind. It's staggering, right? So the point is that we go, it's about choice. The only argument here is that we each get to make our own decision regardless of what's going on. And the only way to take that to its extension, to its logical extension, is to say, I don't care if we're talking about, and this is where, what's his name, just made an argument, which shows me, I forget his name off the top of my head.
Sam Harris?
Sam Harris.
Yeah.
He came out and said, well, if it was Ebola, if it was 50% death rate, then all these people would have been okay forcing it on everybody. And I'm like, there you go again, proving that you don't understand what we were talking about, right? I don't care if it's 100% death rate. It's my choice.
I agree.
And that's just logic. And the point would be, obviously, if people knew it was that dangerous, then they most likely would probably take it anyway. And that's how that works, and it always has worked, Right. So it's just about drawing that line in the sand about choice, and then letting people make – because a lot of the movement ends up trying to kind of – and I get it, trying to step ahead of that and saying, I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to save your children, which I'm all about that. I don't think these things should even be in existence right now. The COVID shots they're giving people are absolutely deadly. But you got to let people make their own choices. We can't make that same mistake in reverse. You got to give them the information and let them look at it. But to the earliest part about the location, I get where Gert's coming from when you say something like that. I mean, I think
he was saying it from an immunological point of view and not from a legal point of view.
Right,
for example.
like the idea being, well, if it's to figure out whether this thing is dangerous, we don't need to know where it comes from. Like, I get that, but I'm with you in the sense that it's paramount to understanding whether this was what we are all concerned about, that this was a deliberate act, or even just that it was irresponsible action by the government that led to this. Like, that's more important in some cases than whether it's dangerous now. But I think it's more important an immediate thing to stop people from taking this thing, right? So it's kind of a mixed bag. It's definitely difficult, but yeah, I forget the middle part. But I definitely think that just choice is where it all comes down to.
Now, one of the guests that you've had on TLAV is the great Dr. Sucharit Bhakti. Mm-hmm. And I was just so impressed by Dr. Bhakti from the beginning. And I noticed he was met with very aggressive censorship very early. That was my first little taste of, censorship is happening. Because I was looking for the dissident doctors, and he was one of the first that I came across. And the interview with him, I think, on trigonometry, was the first thing that I was thinking, this is something people should see to start thinking about some other considerations in regard to this. And just as soon as I sent it to people, I was getting messages saying, yeah, the video is gone. It was removed. So he was aggressively censored. And then I noticed it was fascinating that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was held up, quote unquote vaccine. I always like to say fake vaccine or product falsely marketed as a vaccine. I hate to use their terminology when it's incorrect. But the J&J jab was suspended for a few days, it seems. They noticed some blood clots. And I said, well, that's what Dr. Bhakti was saying. So why was he suspended? He should have been on a board, on a committee, being consulted, since he was obviously very knowledgeable about the potential harms of these things. And that's a thing that I would like to ask you about, sort of a little bit of gossip, I guess, from the scene, but to put out there the premise of what Dr. Robert Malone was saying in the first place. I think his best interview was also on the High Wire, where he really got to go into his experience as an inventor of mRNA. And I think a fundamental problem that people need to understand here is that Dr. Robert Malone, an inventor of mRNA, to what extent it's been advanced and altered and other contributions have been made, fine. But he has patents that are directly related to the injectables that were put out. And Dr. Robert Malone simply said mRNA wasn't safe. We discovered it. We thought we had the greatest invention in medical history, and we realized it's actually not safe. And maybe it could be fixed. Maybe it could be used for acute medical emergencies. But his original quote was, the government is playing fast and loose with public health. And he just basically said mRNA is dangerous, and no one has explained how they solved the problem of that. And that's basically what it seems to me happened, is that there was something that's on record as being dangerous, and without fixing it, they gave it to people. So I found it strange when I shared links, and I remember one person in particular said, I'm not impressed. Well, it's not a dance routine or a song. He said something's not safe. I mean, what's there actually to be impressed with? But speaking of Robert Malone, what, and I don't mean to bring you into gossip, obviously I'm expecting your journalistic point of view, not like your personal feeling necessarily, but what do you think's happening here with this sort of infighting that's happening on the medical freedom side of things? And the Robert Malone massive lawsuit, which seems absurd. I'm very impressed with what Robert Malone has said in various speeches, but I'm disappointed that he's suing other members of the medical freedom movement. And I'm just wondering, what's going on at this point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I'll give you my opinions, but it's hard to speak to, what people are thinking when they're taking action like that. But, there's so many obvious manipulators in all of this. And I think to take it from the earliest kind of giving them the benefit of the doubt kind of perspective, I understand how it's easy to kind of be overly concerned or overly suspicious. It's justified today. It's a lot of this is very manipulative. So you could fall into this category where they may have a difference of opinion on a very important point. Even more specifically talking about the virus, no virus conversation.
Right.
And I'll be the first to tell you that there's a lot of really compelling stuff, both in regard to whether COVID-19 is real or whether the viruses have ever been real. And at this point, I feel like I'm in the middle. I feel like neither side of this has really fully explained enough for me to, and that doesn't make either side happy, quite frankly. But objectively, I think there's a lot to it. My point, though, is that you'll get people that will then decide because Ryan, or let's just say two doctors, have decided that this is not what I think it is. He is a fake person because I know I'm right. Now, that's hubris. That's assumption. And even if they're right, I feel like that's pretty irresponsible, as a doctor.
Right.
They could just, we all know people can just think differently. We can, as I'm saying with this bigger body of work around terrain theory, that I've looked at everything, and I still walk away going, I don't know, I'm not convinced. How does bacteria play into this? Couldn't that be the same? All these things I bring up, but then people just go, oh, you're a fake, you're a shill, or whatever. I think that's happening in this dynamic where you get people, or could be, who disagree on very fundamental points of mRNA, and they just start acting like they're convinced that person is not real. I don't know. There's a lot of suspicion about Robert Malone because of his ties. I have seen
to DARPA.
Kind of the ideas that mRNA, Robert Malone, that you could start bottom line being that mRNA being floated as even possibly being useful right now is really concerning to me.
Right.
Even if you think it is a viable technology, like how you could ever use something like that with the current broken nature of all of our systems, like it seems dangerous. So I don't know, and I've seen that a lot. But I think Dr. Bhakdi in particular has proven himself to be one of the most trustworthy people in this entire thing. And I've seen I'm with you on that. From day one, he was outspoken. He was clear and concise, and he was saying these are dangerous. He's quoted on Fox News in 2020 saying, if you take these shots, you take them to your doom.
Yeah.
I mean, think about how far ahead he was. I mean, there were doctors that were barely willing to stand up and talk about masks at that point. He was coming out telling you, run screaming. And the biggest point, and this is why I think he was so attacked and still is being attacked, because he came out and said something that every single one of these doctors knew, still know, and most have even dared to say anything about still. You cannot vaccinate against a respiratory virus with a muscle shot in your arm.
Right.
It's impossible. You cannot create mucosal immunity. And what happened? Oh, weird. These didn't cause mucosal immunity. Who could have guessed?
Right.
Dr. Bhakdi,
right.
who said it over and over. And so that freaks me out, to be honest. How can we not? That means every one of these doctors were too afraid to say what they knew was fundamentally true. That's terrifying. And that goes back to the manufacturing consent, whether they felt they were going to lose their practice.
Right. Well,
yeah,
you know what the analogy was that
right.
you drew to mind earlier as you were describing just the sort of the bigger mechanisms of things and how everyone just sort of plays their part. It sort of reminds me of like a Broadway show. You know, if I'm sitting there playing the tuba as part of a horn section of a bigger orchestra of a bigger show, well, I'm not the lighting person. I'm not the manager. I'm not even the guy playing the trumpet. I'm playing the tuba. And we kind of think that the person who's in a system is aware of the entire system. And mostly they're very fixated on their own responsibility within the much larger structure and mechanism of what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
But another bit of infighting that's happened that I haven't had a chance to fully wrap my head around that's even frustrated me more than the Robert Malone thing was I was shocked to see Sasha Lachipova attack Professor David Martin. And she was calling him a fraud. And I was just thinking, well, how did he get before the European Parliament? They didn't determine that he was a fraud, and he has no background in patent law and the stuff that he's presented himself as an expert in. I mean, he's been extremely well spoken. That frustrated me so much because those are two of the biggest heavy hitters on the scene. So it's like your first baseman attacking your third baseman, you know? It's like, come on, guys, what's going on? Why, at what point is attacking each other more important than fighting the monster that we're all fighting? Yeah,
see, it's an impossible question because I'll tell you right now, there's plenty of people that I am very convinced are, and I feel like I could prove it, not fighting for truth, who are not on anybody's side, who are actively misrepresenting the truth on a regular basis. And I'm not even talking about like difference of opinions about origin or the lethality, but like basic fundamental things that everybody acknowledges, even the corporate media or whatever. They just misrepresent things to benefit themselves. It's happening everywhere with Maui right now. That's just how this tends to go. Right. But my point would be that it's hard because in that dynamic, who's to say that Sasha's not aware or vice versa? That let me put it this way. If you become aware that somebody is actively from within the community misleading people, and let's just say you are convinced by that, it's a hard thing to not feel that's more important to point out, because I'm the first one that will say that people leading half-truths are more dangerous than wholesale liars. I've said that and I say that right now over and over because it's so very clear that you have these Pied Pipers of the paradigm that are leading people with half-truths and misinformation right into where the government wants them. Like that's why, they want you to see the right as the way, the white supremacists, whatever they're framing them all as. And so you got these people that are driving them in that direction that it's not organic, and vice versa. Same thing on the left with the trans movement, whatever else. And so the point is that I guess it's hard. Again, I don't know what they're thinking, but it's very difficult if you think that to not feel like it's important to act. But I do agree with you. I think that if you had to draw a line, it's more damaging to draw division between people who are, even if wrong, trying to do the right thing. So that's why I say it's an impossible question because, it all comes down to what Sasha or Martin think. And, I think they both seem like legitimate people. I think Martin has done some amazing work on those patents that really did kind of blow open the door about the clear engineering. Whether or not you think that became COVID-19, what he's showing you is crazy important.
Right.
Then Sasha's coming from the angle of the military countermeasures and the fact that, I don't know, it's almost like you think they should
be working together. Yeah, right? Exactly.
Yeah, but it's hard. Do you happen to know what the point of division was?
You know what? I need to go. I started to read stuff, and the only thing I remembered when I was trying to remember what did she actually accuse him of was I just remember her calling him a fraud. I was like, about what? For what? I need to look at it more carefully.
Too bad.
But yeah, those were two of the leading figures in the movement. But let me return to sort of the big picture again, which we started out talking sort of big picture, and I want to return to big picture in terms of what Sasha Latypova introduced to the conversation. Now, initially, when all of this was happening, my instinct, what I thought we were observing was, oh my goodness, this is the day that corporations, corporate power, that pharma is exerting, we're more powerful than governments. I thought this was a big push by too big to fail, too big to jail corporations who are now saying, we bought the government and now we're cashing in. Then Sasha Latypova comes in and says, no, this was a military operation. This whole COVID thing was a Department of Defense operation and apparently has a bunch of FOIA documents to back up what she's saying. Now, what's your take on the origin of power of this? Is this a military operation? Is this corporate? What is this? And then if it's a military operation, why were Russia and China, for example, in coordination with the United States? Why were our on-paper enemies in harmony with us about this? Their intelligence services didn't indicate to them this originated with the Department of Defense in the United States. Would they be buying into an agenda laid out by a military adversary? I can't get myself over the top to think who actually has this level of power. It's like the incredible montages after 9/11 where we saw all the media organizations around the world were saying, our lives will never be the same. Those brilliant montages where they say, hey, the media corporations around the country are being fed lines from the same script writer. And then all of a sudden we saw that around the globe by different world leaders. What is the origin of power? Where is this being derived from? It's inconceivable.
Yeah, I think that it comes down to the question of whether we think that the military has essentially co-opted, the corporate side of the world, or if it's the other way around, or if the pharma corporate side of the world has co-opted everything else. And it's it's more complicated than that, because I think the core question is, well, really, as you pointed out, it's obvious to see that the pharma industry, or rather just, the whole kind of fascist overlap of what's going on here, the blending between government and corporations where we don't even know the difference, the public-private partnership, that's all of what that is. That is very clear. Now, is that deriving an agenda that the military is choosing to take part in? Are they working together? It's really hard to see. But I do think it's important to notice that the military and the intelligence apparatus are very, very clearly its own kind of thing in my mind. And I think that you could even make a very clear argument or prove that the apparatus, the CIA kind of entities, are not necessarily under the control of the government, or rather the White House, let's put it that way. I think it's more that they're almost unaccountable to this point. They work together, if you look at it that way. And so you could look at it, taking the military side of it. It's very clear that this was an agenda that started there. Right, so you have the military aspect of this that really does, and I think most of these things do, and they work with the pharma companies in regard to testing and different things because they have to. So ultimately, you have this idea about biosurveillance, about nanotechnology in general. They're already talking about the Internet of Nano Things. Like, these are all military-sided concepts. Robert Langer, Charles Lieber, right? All this stuff, it all ties together with what they're trying to do invasively, both to foreign adversaries, but also to people in their own countries. So then you have the pharma side of it, where they're outwardly only concerned about illness and health and so on, but yet they're still using these parts, which Sasha and the rest we can prove are coming directly from medical countermeasures, from things that are about defense and military, or rather war. So is pharma aware of that? I guess my big answer is I don't know. I don't think we do truly know I think the best way to look at all of it is that these groups are definitely working together, and I would argue they definitely know what they're all generally working toward. And you could just say they're all one entity, but I generally think it's much more multifaceted than that. But it's like all the rest of the conversations we've had. These groups have been co-opted. That's why you see the revolving door between government and pharma, and the military is just this constant, it seems, and I think that's the whole continuity of government aspect and, the real kind of control structure. I quite frankly don't think the White House has much control today, but that's another story.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't seem like it. I mean, it just seems like more theater than ever before. I mean, don't they have like the alternative White House, which is like a set for shooting a sitcom type of thing? Like, Biden got his first booster on a what's basically like a set.
It's an important
for
discussion.
television
The continuity
production.
of government, starting with Reagan. I mean, that was the creation of the shadow government, and it never went away. Right? I mean, it grew, and it literally is. You could argue, and that's where the intelligence apparatus is coming from. I mean, if you understand the concept of continuity of government, the whole point is to have an active government in the event of an emergency, right? So the entire White House goes down, and all of a sudden, they have continuity of government ready. They initiate the plan. The point was to have it's active, not that they initiate it, but rather that there is a secondary kind of shadow government, and you could argue that's more so what's controlling things today. That's the deep state. That's the unelected, never leaving power structure. And I think that the corporate side of things are just kind of the co-opted version of that. I mean, maybe at one point these were individuals, but if you can look and see that, I think it's down to 4 companies now that own all newspaper, media, radio, everything. It's the same kind of game on the food side or on the corporate side. They all kind of come back to the same ultimate groups. So I guess we should start really looking at who, the key controllers behind these individual groups and their connection to the military. I bet you that would show everything.
Right. And another huge question. I'm sorry to ask such a huge question here, but I'd love to hear just your reaction to the question of why did they need to inject everybody? Because they clearly weren't injecting people with nothing. There's this discussion of maybe as many as a third of the injections were placebo. But if you want it, and I'm not saying that that's not true, I don't actually know, but it just strikes me as strange that when you do the full court press to inject everybody with something, why would you waste that one-shot deal injecting people with placebos at any point? But in any case, it's like there was the depopulation agenda was proposed by Mike Eden early on. He said, I just can't see anything that they're trying to do other than depopulate. I thought that was fantastical at the time, but I didn't discount it. And now we have these excess deaths to go along with the vaccine rollout, direct correlation. I think it's fair to say we're past the correlation does not equal causation argument. It's causal at this point. It's a direct timeline, and it's not being observed in the countries where the shots were not administered. So there's also the injectable operating system. What's the deal? Did they want to kill people? Did they want operating systems in our body? And if some people died as a result of that, that was collateral damage. What did they want to inject us so badly for? I mean, it's immediately are accused of being a conspiracy theorist and even speculating about that. But they did want to inject us and succeeded in doing so on a massive scale. So why?
Yeah. Well, one thing I always put out there, I agree. I think that's what ultimately happened. But we should at least ask ourselves whether or not that number is a lie. Just to throw it out there, because I think question everything's important.
The total, the total uptake, you mean?
Yeah. Like, let's just say maybe it was 20%, maybe it was 40%, maybe it was 99%. My point is,
I totally agree. Well, first of all, exaggerating your success is a form of promotion, first of all. So if they're promoting what they're doing relentlessly, that's exaggerating the enthusiasm for it is necessarily going to be a big part of it. So I totally agree.
And that's one that leads to the social engineering that, we're herd animals. People are very susceptible to suggestion. And so if you come out and go, 90% of people got it, why haven't you? Most people are going to go, maybe I should. And so I think we just ask that for people. Because I always point out that the bivalent shot really highlights the fact that people showed up. 14% of people, only 14, 17% of people got it, right? So they said, we're not going to do this, even though they were coerced and went along with it. We're 3 shots. They stepped up and said, nope, not this one.
Right. Too much. Enough is enough. So we're running out of time, unfortunately, Ryan. I hope we can do this again at some point. But I want to ask you another enormous question that hopefully you could answer really quickly so we could play a little bit of your music as we're closing. But
Okay, sorry, I'm getting some feedback. I'm hearing another voice, so I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, really? Hello? Can you hear me? Testing 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I can hear you, but there's another voice in the background. Keep going. I'll try to work with it.
Yeah, sorry about that. So the general question is, with the central bank digital currency approaching, what do we need to do now? What's your general recommendation to the concerned citizen? They want to step up. One thing they need to do is tune in to the LastAmericanVagabond.com and check out your previous episodes and what you're coming up with. But in general, what does the citizen need to do now to brace ourselves for potentially another pandemic people are talking about, the central bank digital currency, the next phase of the game? How do we prepare for the next phase of the game?
Yeah, that's a good question to end on. By the way, I apologize. The last point I was kind of in the middle, and I got distracted by what was happening, so I apologize about that.
No, it's okay. I'm sorry. We're scrambling here.
Give me a pass on the last one. No, but I think to end in general, I think that whether it's CBDC or anything, I think it's important to resist all of this stuff right now. Anything that leads in a direction of less privacy, no matter what the sold convenience is, and I really emphasize the sold convenience, does not mean that's what's going to happen.
Right.
But the idea that we need to start taking a stand against things that may make your life easier if they're trying to push into your life more to get your, and I'm not even talking electronically alone. The retina scans, face scans, and palm scans. That should be a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. But just in general, whether it's about information about your family, consensus information, it's so clear that there is kind of an alarming, invasive push right now that's about censorship. It's about stopping you from being able to express your opinions, whether it's elections or anything else.
Your medical records not being private anymore.
Everything. Just have the courage to stand up for what you believe is right. And you know what? Maybe that means you think I'm wrong in this case, and that's okay too. But the point is, we need to be courageous enough to stand up and put forward what we think is right. And I think all of these things are very clearly on the surface designed to reduce your freedom, to increase their control. Even if you think that amounts to somehow a better society in the future, that shouldn't be one person's choice. It shouldn't be one group's choice. It should be everybody's choice to make up their own future. That's self-reliance, that's self-determinability. That's what we should all be striving for, So opt out of it, man. I think all these things we need to kind of take a beat on and stop trying to rush into the metaverse and CBDCs and all this stuff. I think it's important to see how they flesh out or, quite frankly, stop them entirely. That's where I'm lining up.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you. Tune into the Last American Vagabond, everyone. It's such an outstanding program. And we also have a little bit of music to play as we're ending the program. I want you to hear this great song by Ryan, Money Game, which we have queued up. Ryan he's a little modest about it, but he's a wonderful singer and guitar player as well. Thank you, Ryan. Talk to you soon, brother.
Talk to you soon. Appreciate it.